Hi, this is Erica, Vixen, Gavin, coming to you along with Chuck and Ed on TV Confidential. Here we go.
Ed Robertson with a reminder that we will welcome back Michelle Danner later on the hour. We hope you stay tuned for that. In the meantime, Randy Skretvedt's on the line with us. Randy Skretvedt, entertainment historian, author of many books on the movies and the career of Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy. Randy's latest book, March of the Wooden Soldiers, The Amazing Story of Laurel and Hardy's Babes in Toyland, available wherever books are sold through Bonaventure Press, bonaventurepress.com, as well as Amazon.com. And one of the Easter eggs of Randy's book is he includes Hal Roach's original treatment, the way he originally saw Laurel and Hardy's Babes in Toyland being made. And as you just touched on, not only was it dark, it was not necessary. I mean, it was more like he wrote the story and inserted Laurel and Hardy in the story versus how the movie was actually made, which is they took Babes in Toyland and tailored it around Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah, when you see the actual script that they used, which I have, I didn't include that in its entirety because that script it has everything that we see in the movie with Tom and Bo Peep and Barnaby and those characters, but when it comes time for Laurel and Hardy, the script says we insert a Laurel and Hardy scene here. So they were basically the fellows who wrote it, who were Frank Butler and Nick Grinday. They wrote the basic storyline, but they left the comedy up to Stan Laurel and his usual team of gag writers. And so, the script, you're looking for Laurel and Hardy comedy in the script, and it just basically leaves it up to Stan Laurel to figure out what they're going to do.
And a lot of times, Stan didn't figure out what they were going to do until they were on the set. I understand there was a lot of improvising, particularly during the scenes when Stan and Ollie were being filmed for the movie.
Yes, well, that was one of Henry Brandon's favorite story, his first day on the set. And he said, he was kind of nervous. This is basically his first movie. I think he'd been an extra in a Cecil B. DeMille movie called The Sign of the Cross, but he was only an extra in that one. So this is really his first big role in a motion picture. And he said, I hadn't worked with comedians before, and so we sit down, and Stan looks at the script, and then he puts it aside, and he says, okay, I'll do this, and then Babe, you do this, and then Henry, you come in and say this, and then I'll say this, and Babe will do that, and then Henry, you say this, and then he got up and said, okay, let's shoot it. And Henry said, aren't we going to rehearse? And Stan said, do you want to spoil it? Because he said they wanted to get the magic of the first time.
Right.
If you were filming it as you were actually performing it for the first time, there is a freshness and an immediacy to the performance that you don't get if you've done 20 or 30 takes. Now, this is the direct opposite of Charlie Chaplin's method. Charlie Chaplin would act out everybody's part for them, and he wanted them to do it exactly as he had done it, and he would shoot 50 or 60 takes until he was happy with whatever the other performers were doing.
Jerry Lewis, too.
That burns up a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of film. And Laurel and Hardy working for the Hal Roach Studios, that was pretty much a low-budget studio. They were releasing through MGM, and so as a result, Hal Roach had to make his movies look as polished as homegrown MGM movies, but he had to do it with limited funding. So it was a good thing that Stan didn't want to use a lot of takes and tried to get everything on the first take.
On screen, Ollie was the one who always yelled at Stan and hit him on the back of the head with his derby, and Stan was always the one crying. In real life, and this is one of the great stories you share with your readers in March of the Wooden Soldiers, Randy, in many ways, Stan was the true brains of the operation, and Ollie, or Babe as everyone called him, who knew him, was very laid back, easygoing. He let Stan run the show because he knew Stan knew what he was doing.
Right, and he didn't want to intrude on Stan's creative process. But yes, Stan was very much involved in the writing, and I've heard from several actors rather, who worked with Laurel and Hardy, that Stan would sort of subtly direct the director.
Yes.
He'd go up and say, "You had a really great idea this morning where you thought that we should do such and such," and he'd put words in the director's mouth so that it didn't look like he was pulling rank on him. So he was doing it in a very subtle way, in a very tactful and diplomatic way. But I also got to talk with both of the key Laurel and Hardy movie editors. They were both still alive back in the early 80s. And the one who worked on March of the Wooden Soldiers was a man named Bert Jordan. And he was 92 years old when I interviewed him. And he was physically frail, but he had a terrific memory and was a great interview. And so he said, well, the way that we would cut these films is, he says, they tried as much as possible to shoot in sequence, which is not the way they make most movies.
Yeah.
Most movies, if you have 5 scenes on a given set and they're spotted throughout the picture, you shoot all of those scenes together, and then you strike that set and move on to something else. And then you just, in the editing, you put those scenes where they're supposed to belong in the story. Well, Laurel and Hardy, because they improvised a lot, they said, if somebody gets a black eye in an early scene, that may not be in the script. So we got to make sure that for continuity purposes, we have to shoot everything in sequence. So from beginning to end is the way that they usually shot their movies. This did have a beneficial effect as far as editing was concerned, because the editors could be putting the early scenes together while the later scenes were being filmed, and so it didn't take very long at all after shooting was completed to have a first cut. And Bert Jordan told me that the first cut was his. He put it together the way he thought it should be, but then he'd show it to Stan and Mr. Roach, and they would have ideas. Sometimes they wouldn't change a lot at all. Sometimes Stan would say, well, I think that plays better in the two-shot rather than in the close-up. And, so Stan would have suggestions. And, in fact, I found a document from a film that Laurel and Hardy made in 1939 called The Flying Deuces. And in that film, it was made for another studio, so Stan was not going to be able to work with the film editor. And he made very, very detailed and precise notes about the editing of every scene. You really get a sense, reading that document, of how involved he was in all aspects of filmmaking. So he wasn't just a fine, talented comedian. He really knew every aspect of writing, directing, and editing movies. And so, yes, he was the brains. Babe, of course, was a magnificent actor. I often think that Babe Hardy is perhaps the finest movie actor of his generation. He's just, every performance he gives is just so genuine and so heartfelt. And Hal Roach said, I never saw Stan Laurel tell Hardy how to do anything. He said everything that Babe did was his. All the gestures, the looks to the camera, the twiddling of the tie, the little hand movements that he did, he said that it was all Hardy, and he said nobody ever had to tell him what to do. He was a hell of a good actor.
Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back.
This portion of TV Confidential is brought to us by our friends at Front Porch Realty, the community of realtors in the Northern Bay area of California that is committed to finding the solution that is best for their clients. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or looking to sell or lease your property in Northern California, call Karen Strain at 415-886-7411 or visit frontporchrealtygroup.com for more information on how they can help you.
One more item. If you're starting a company, particularly one that is in an emerging market, you know that averting any sort of legal dispute is crucial to your business plan. Our friends at Tectonic Law offer an array of services that can help you avoid and preempt future litigation while also developing and protecting your intellectual property and intangible assets. Tectonic Law serves the needs of a host of emerging industries throughout California and beyond, including industrial designers, beverage makers, artists, farmers, retail stores, health practitioners, wellness experts, cosmetics manufacturers, nonprofit organizations, innovators in sustainable practices, and libraries. Go to tectoniclaw.com to learn more about how Tectonic Law can help your business thrive. tectoniclaw.com. Rock solid representation for groundbreaking industries.
Hi, this is Lawrence Fleckerbill. You are listening to TV Confidential.
Randy Skretvedt's on the line with us. Randy's most recent book, March of the Wooden Soldiers, The Amazing Story of Laurel and Hardy's Babes in Toyland. Everything you want to know and more about the making of the classic Laurel and Hardy film, known to some of us belovedly as March of the Wooden Soldiers. March of the Wooden Soldiers, available through Bonaventure Press, bonaventurepress.com, as well as Amazon.com. Chuck?
I have an observation, Randy, on regards to shooting in sequence. When the Marx Brothers were filming The Coconuts, they were Broadway actors used to spontaneity and so forth, and it threw them at first because stuff would be shot out of sequence. And in fact, for most of their Paramount films on, that was always a problem for them because they couldn't build on it. They, and plus multiple takes and all that sort of thing.
Right. So
that's why in the case of Laurel and Hardy, to shoot in sequence, they're more aware of how the story's going, and it shows. You can just see it builds nice. And regarding Babe Hardy, not only I think was Babe Hardy one of the greatest film actors of his generation, probably one of the nicest guys. You never hear anybody say bad about him or Harpo Marx. There just isn't anything. They're just real sweet guys.
He was very, very modest about his own abilities. In fact, when he was interviewed by their biographer, John McCabe, he said, I don't know that there's very much to write about me. I just basically did a lot of gags in front of a camera and played golf the rest of the time.
And he did.
So yeah, he was very, very modest. And I talked to an actress named Anita Garvin, who was in a lot of the other Laurel and Hardy pictures, and she said, "Oh yeah, between takes he'd play his ukulele and just pass the time of day." That was one great thing about the Hal Roach Studios, was that there was no cast system. Everybody got along well. So and also, comedy is a very different kind of movie from drama. Drama, you can get away with shooting things out of sequence. Comedy, it works better to shoot in sequence. And also, Hal Roach always said, 50% of what's in the script will not play. That was just a given. That what you've written down may look very funny on paper when you read it, but when you actually get up on the stage and have it before the camera and act it out, you can see that maybe this isn't working. So that's why they always had gag men on the set, along with Stan Laurel, and anybody who was on the crew, the lighting guys or the cameramen or whoever, if they had a funny idea, it would be considered. So, everybody who worked at the Hal Roach Studios thought of it as being a very special place. Everybody got along with each other, and because all they made was comedies, these were all people who had a sense of humor. So it was called The Lot of Fun, because it was a motion picture lot, and they made funny movies. So the Hal Roach Studios, the official nickname of it was The Lot of Fun.
Yeah, and one more observation on Ollie before we move on. If you look at Ollie's performances in, say, the early Larry Seaman silent shorts, he's very broad and big. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like as movies progressed into the 20s silence, into the 30s talkies, Ollie instinctively knew how to pare it down and play to the audience and be more subtle as it grew. And you can just see him keep growing as an actor. Because in those early Larry Seamans, he's outrageously all over the place, but it fits for the time, 1919, 18, whatever it was.
Right. Well, and Larry Seaman's style of humor is very broad and cartoonish. Some of those Larry Seaman movies, even though they were two real comedies, they cost a fortune because he would do aerial things, with the guys in World War I airplanes, and he would blow up buildings, and he would do all these very expensive, crazy gags. So, yes, you probably want a more broad style of performance for that type of comedy. But, of course, Laurel and Hardy, a lot of their humor is in between the lines. It's a lot of reaction shots. Right. You have Babe looking at us after Stan has bungled something. You have Ollie's look to us for sympathy, and then you have a reaction shot from Stan, and then you cut back to another reaction shot from Ollie. And so Hal Roach said, so that way you not only got the laugh from whatever the gag was, you got 3 more laughs on top of it with the reaction shots. So that's one thing that they did that was subtle and distinctive about them. And I mentioned Anita Garvin. She was one of their supporting players who also knew the value of underplaying. Now, a lot of the other supporting players, like Jimmy Finlayson, who is the bald Scotsman who squints with one eye and who's also famous now for giving us "Dole," which has been co-opted by Nestor Lanetta for Homer Simpson, although he does give Jimmy Finlayson credit. He had a broader style of performance. But Anita Garvin was also very subtle, and she said, nobody ever taught me that. She said, I just figured that if you're playing it in a long shot, you have to play it somewhat broadly. If you're in a closer shot with just 2 of you, then you play it less broadly. And if you're in a close-up, all you have to do is think something and it will register. Right. So she understood the value of underplaying, as did Babe. Like I say, the great thing about both Laurel and Hardy's performances are their sincerity, and they play everything very seriously. They don't wink at the audience. You know, they don't spoof anything. They're playing everything as if their lives depended upon it. And so Eddie Cantor, who was a great comedian on the Broadway stage and in movies and radio, he said, it's their seriousness that strikes me most forcibly. They play everything as if it were Hamlet or Macbeth. So that's why their performances have a wonderful, genuine quality to them.
Thinking aloud here, Randy, if I remember correctly, both Larry Siemens and Oliver Hardy, their film career began with Vitagraph Studios, the very first motion picture studio as we know it today, which originated in New York in the early 20th century. Am I remembering correctly?
Yes, but there was also a studio out here in California, and in fact it is still a working studio. It's on the corner of Prospect and Talmadge. And for many years it was KABC Television's studio, and they're still working there today. I don't know what the current name of it is, but Babe Hardy made his first movies in Jacksonville, Florida in 1914. He was with a company called Lubin, L-U-B-I-N, and then a couple of years later he was with a company called Vim, V-I-M, making comedy shorts. And he usually was a villain because he was 6'2" and weighed around 300 pounds. Mm-hmm. And so, as you know, most movie comedians are short guys, and they're diminutive, and they need a villain to tower over them. So Babe Hardy filled that bill very well. And then he came to California in the company of a guy named Billy West, who was a Charlie Chaplin imitator, and a very good one. And so that's how Babe came out to California in 1918. And he did go to New York at one point in 1915, but didn't care much for New York, so he came back here to Los Angeles. And yes, Larry Seaman was one of the Vitagraph stars in the late teens and early 20s. And so, as I say, the studio is on Prospect and Talmadge. And at that point, Babe lived right across the street. He lived at a house 1719 Talmadge, which unfortunately is no longer there. I was trying to see if it were still standing. I have a couple of pictures of Babe standing in front of the front door, and I have a postcard that was mailed to him at 1719 Talmadge. So that's how I knew the address. So I was on Talmadge Street, and I said, well, there's the studio. So he just had to just walk across the street to go to work, and I see 1713, I see 1715, I see 1717, and then where 1719 would have been, there's this huge apartment building. So they torn down the one house I wanted to see.
March of the Wooden Soldiers, The Amazing Story of Laurel and Hardy's Babes in Toyland, the latest Laurel and Hardy book by our guest Randy Skretvedt, available wherever books are sold through Bonaventure Press, bonaventurepress.com, as well as Amazon.com. Randy Skretvedt will be back next week for part 2 of our conversation. We'll talk about some of the other Easter eggs in his book. Plus, we'll ask Randy why he thinks March of the Wooden Soldiers remains so beloved among all other Laurel and Hardy movies. Part 2 of our conversation with Randy Skretvedt next week on TV Confidential. In the meantime, we'll take a quick time out, then we'll welcome back Michelle Danner. We come back right after this.
Who needs a vacation? Are you ready for an unforgettable getaway? Start packing your bags because Branson, Missouri, the vacation and entertainment capital of the U.S., is calling your name. For just $99 per person, here's what you get. A full 3-day, 2-night stay in a luxury resort hotel. A delicious full breakfast buffet every morning you're here. And when you call right now, free show tickets worth up to $100. That's right, free show tickets to an award-winning show on us. You don't have to leave the country for an amazing vacation. You can drive or fly to Branson and have an incredible time. Whether you bring in the whole family or just planning a romantic escape, this trip is built for you. We guarantee you'll love Branson. This is not a timeshare. It's just an unbeatable vacation deal for only $99 per person. You book now, you can use your tickets anytime this year. You don't even need to know your travel dates to lock in the special price. Hurry, because this offer won't last long. Call our Branson vacation experts today.
800-435-1887. 800-435-1887. 800-435-1887. That's 800-435-1887.